Hello and welcome back to another YouTube video. Today I'm going to be doing my 14.22 mid-lane tier list. So for the content, like, subscribe, and let's get into it. There were a couple of changes this patch. The big one, obviously, the Silas nerf, and then I'd say one of the more hidden ones for this patch was the static shiv change, which has really heavily affected Akshan. I'll talk about that when I get to him, but that looks really promising in its current state. Other than that, we saw a pretty hefty buff towards Swain, and then some other, buffs in the case of, like, your Katarinas, your Fizzes, your Aurelias, and Vel'Kozes, and then some nerfs towards the likes of Corki and Anivia. Corki obviously overperforming as a bot lane option, and then Anivia, the premier pick last patch for mid lane. She was doing really well, and yeah, we tagged her slightly. Let's get into the tier list then. So the D tier is going to consist of the same champions. Ezreal still underperforms within the mid lane. Same goes for Smolder and Tristana. Obviously, Smolder is being adjusted in 14.23, kind of giving him the Tristana treatment, where they nerf down his wave clear, his level scaling, and push him more towards gold scaling so he can function better as a bot laner, whilst trying to get him out of pro gel within the mid lane. It's worked relatively successfully from what I can see for Tristana. They tagged her wave clear, made it so she's not going to be as consistently just shoving out waves and roaming onto sides, and took her level scaling down. Obviously, mid laners are going to get, on average, more XP over the game, and it did what they wanted it to do. In Azir's case, he is the premier elite competitive champion. Obviously, when this pick is good for the average player, he's usually picked ban in competitive. He wasn't seen at Worlds, which I think is kind of unfortunate. It would have been nice to see like one or two games of Azir. I think he has like high highs as like a champion, but obviously, he's been very competitively viable across multiple worlds in the past, which is why he then ended up being pretty heavily nerfed into this one. They buffed him back up afterwards. They gave him back some health regen and I believe some base armor. It hasn't done enough to really like solidify him as like a good average solo queue pick, but if you're comfortable in the champion and you've put a lot of time into him, he can still like be rewarding, and there is value to that there. The other one's just not gonna have the same high highs as Azir, but can also still function, especially if you get access to a lot of gold within the game. The C tier then, Caitlyn maintains her spot here. She, if you can get the ball rolling, is very oppressive. Her range at 650 makes her very powerful for sieging towers and harassing out laners. The biggest problem with this pick, though, is she is very, very weak to ganks and very easy to just snowball against when she falls behind, as oftentimes she won't do the damage to be able to respond to just an all-in from something like a Silas, for example. Overall, this champ is very volatile. If you're very comfortable on it, it can definitely have value. If you're not, it's not necessary to play at the moment. She's being nerfed in 14.23 alongside Youmuu's and the Collector, and that will definitely hurt her depending on like what variation of the build you go. The minion changes look to have done not a huge amount to really enable assassins to thrive. Obviously, that was one of the main goals this patch, was the Youmuu's, the opportunity, and the minion changes to try and enable assassins to be a lot stronger. I'd say the strongest assassin in the game at the moment is probably Talon Jungle in his current state. It's very, very oppressive, especially in Elite. But it's like up there as one of the premier picks of the patch. For mid lane, though, he still looks to be slightly under the under the middle part of the tier list, I would say. It's a slightly below average pick, alongside a lot of the other assassins. Obviously, the main thing with assassins are they are heavy gold scalers, inherently making them elite skewed, and they tend to be very hard to pilot, oftentimes requiring good execution to one-shot your target, which is why they will traditionally sit more lower down on like an average to low elo skew tier list, like this one. So Zed and Kiana maintain their spots. I know Kiana mains are frustrated at where the champion is. I've seen some kind of discourse around it. I think the champion is slightly on the weaker side, but obviously can be very oppressive in Elite, and Zed is obviously a big frustration point. This champion, when viable, oftentimes has one of the highest ban rates in the game, making that once again kind of frustrating for Zed mains primarily, who just won't have access to their champion as often within the game. Katarina changes didn't really do a huge amount. mostly focused around ECD and RCD. She can cast a bit more frequently. The R1 is kind of fake. You're still only really rotating that once, unless obviously you get takedowns, and then that doesn't really change the kind of like effect of the cooldown nerfs. Like sometimes it will matter, like sometimes you will get access to it, but it's not going to be as impactful as just as like Echo R, for example, just having its cooldown cut down a slight bit. The E change does enable Qmax to be like obviously competitive. It already was competitive, but once again didn't do enough to really shift her. She sits as like a high C tier option. I think they could have gone a bit harder, and she might have been pushed up to the B tier. But obviously, Katarina, once again, primarily played by OTPs. If you're comfortable on the pick, you're still going to play it, and you're going to feel a bit better about it after the buffs. Kassadin, I've said in the previous video, but I feel like they over-nerfed him, basically. Kassadin is one of those champions which should inherently have a slightly above average win rate for the average game. He is an incredibly aggressive level scaler. Obviously, everyone knows level 16 Kassadin. As being like a really strong breakpoint of this pick, and they basically just overswung. They nerfed him to the point where he now feels pretty rough to play, like as like a general pick. Obviously, in specific matchups, he can still be very valuable. If you can consistently get your level 16 threshold, then there is definitely like a lot of still potency within this pick. I know there's lots of like keystone options for the champion at the moment, and oftentimes it just comes down to what you feel comfortable on and what you want within the game. Like I've seen like Grasp and Conqueror as like your more niche ones, but like your electrocutes, your first strikes, but there's just loads of things accessible to him, like your fleets still, and yeah, he sits as like a high C tier option. He definitely got over nerfed though, but once again, if you're comfortable on the champion, you're still going to pick him in the spots where you would have previously picked him. Twisted Fate is bad at the moment. There's no real way around that. The champion got pretty heavily nerfed back when it was obviously a very prominent top laner. He hasn't really found success in the mid lane since, which is unfortunate. I dislike it when champions are quite aggressively nerfed in a different role to the one where they were causing problems. Obviously, the main kind of like thing with Twisted Fate Top was it was AD Twisted Fate Top. There is no reason why they can't just buff back some of his AP ratios. They nerfed them down in the past. They went after his W AP ratio. I'm not saying that they should like buff that one specifically again, but there's definitely like room for him to be buffed back to like a viable spot in my opinion. Moving on then, so Corki is going to drop all the way down to the C tier. He was a low A tier, like a mid to low A tier pick in the mid lane. He does perform worse in the mid lane than in the bot lane now. They have definitely pushed him more towards being an early game gold scaler. If you like get early kills and you're like ahead of the curve, he can be very oppressive and does a lot of damage. Like his base damage is very high. They obviously also buffed up his W quite aggressively, but spell feels quite powerful now, especially if you're able to consistently hold people within the dot on it. The other thing with Corki though, but yeah, they nerfed down his level scaling in the previous patch, and that's just going to be more of a nerf to mid lane Corki. So he stays as a solid bot laner, like an A tier bot laner. For mid lane though, he does sink all the way down to like a C tier pick at the moment. Moving on to the B tier then, we have Yone, who is obviously suffering a bit more after his nerfs, like the Bork nerfs and the direct nerfs to him on his W did hit him a bit. The thing at the moment, though, is the Yoon Towers. That was obviously one of the main things this patch. Like, how does Yoon Towers affect the likes of Yasuo and Yone? It looks to be a viable option. The problem with Yoon Towers and its current state, and why it's being buffed in 14.23, is its build path's really bad. It's Scout Slingshot, BF Sword, and a Longsword. And if you're ever backing at something like 1.1k, it just feels really rough to try and like build into this item. BF Sword tends to traditionally be quite a hard item like to obtain like early on. Like backing on 1300 is like a very greedy back. You're sat on a lot of gold in most situations, which yeah can be quite punishing. I hope they change the build path or give it some love in a way which like doesn't make it suddenly the best thing to go, but like maintains it as a good option and makes it feel better as an item to purchase. But both Yasuo and Yone do slightly underperform at the moment within the mid lane. And if you're struggling against these champions, I still recommend the likes of Renekton and like Pantheon as being like very good options to shut these two down. If not, they're not like necessary to play at the moment, but they are still traditionally like two of them. I mean, they are the two most popular AD mid laners. They will maintain that position for as long as probably another champion comes out. So yeah, if you want to develop a counter for them, there is definitely a lot of things accessible to you at the moment. And yeah. The other picks within the beta, then Talons, it's like a high beta option. If you're comfortable on the pick, then he can be very valuable. He has obviously very high lethal thresholds when you're able to consistently stack up Conqueror, rotate passive, drop on an Ignite. There's definitely a lot of kill threat in lane now, especially with like some of the previous buffs and like more recent buffs he's received. Combined with the wave changes, it does help him slightly, but he's not suddenly going to jump up to like the A, S, and S plus tier. If you like Talon, he's good. Like, he is a good pick. But obviously, this is going to be a more generalistic tier list. If you're not comfortable with the pick, then yeah, he's not necessary. But he's a nice option to have within your arsenal of champions at the moment. Aurora is being reworked in 14.23, so I'll touch on her lightly here. The main kind of frustration of the pick is the fact that she is very elite skewed. I mean, obviously, this is very true, especially in high elo. Like, she is #1 top laner, in my opinion, for high elo top lane. She's less oppressive in the mid lane, like the shorter lane is going to be worse for her. Like, she has very strong power in running people down, which obviously makes her very oppressive within the top lane. And her ultimate is a very powerful tool, but she's still a very good mid laner. If you put the time in, then you can definitely find value in this pick, but she is being adjusted in 14.23, so it's not really worth playing the current iteration. You should probably just become a bit more comfortable with the new one when it comes out. Jace is fair. He's a good AD pick if you put the time in. If you're not, if you don't put the time in, then he's just going to lose value. Like, Jace mid lane traditionally builds a bit more heavy into damage. You're looking at more like lethality orientated items, and then like things like electrocute, people feel a lot more comfortable on into like some of the squishier targets within the mid lane. And I do think mid lane Jace is better than top lane Jace in its current state. So if you do want to play Jace, I would recommend playing him here. Especially, obviously, he has a legendary coming out in 14.24, free, I think, and that might encourage some people to try and practice for champion. And if you do, yeah, try him in both roles, see what you feel comfortable with. He does have a very steep mastery curve. That is the main thing. Like, rotating through 6 abilities can feel quite overwhelming if you're like not very comfortable or used to that kind of playstyle. Ziggs sits as a mid beta option. He still has a very powerful siege. He is still one of the like very solid mid lane artillery, like AP artillery options. With Vel'Koz being buffed though, I would go back to probably recommending Vel'Koz over him, and Xerath has always been my favourite of the artillery options, but Ziggs still gets the job done, and if you want something with a bit more sieging potential, and maybe a bit less reliable, then yeah, Ziggs is there as like an option for you. Zoe is primarily just play one tricks, very oppressive early game, doesn't scale that well with level, like actually one of the weaker level scalers within the game. Oftentimes makes for a really oppressive support. So if you like enjoy Zoe, then once again, like Jace, I'd recommend trying her in her 2 roles, seeing what you're comfortable with. But the main thing is like you just need to get an early snowball going. If you're not consistently getting takedowns, you will feel really like you will just become a bubble bot, and you're not gonna really have much value outside of that unless you once again get like snowballing and like have a really strong early game advantage. Akali's in a fine spot at the moment. Like, I actually like Akali in her current state. I think she has the right amount of mastery, and like if you put the time into her, she is very rewarding. She does struggle in some matchups where, once again, like a lot of the picks in the mid lane isn't able to consistently snowball, but her main builds obviously like consist of like your rocket belts, your shadow flames, your storm surges. There's different variations we see of her, like your Lichbane, obviously another one there. And it really comes down to like what you feel comfortable with and what you need within the game. But if you're good at piloting Akali, she is in a very good spot in her current state. Morgana is less reliable. I'm not a huge fan of Morgana. Like, I don't actively promote this as opposed to things like Akali and Talon. Like, I think these champions do have increasing success the more mastery you put in. Morgana just mainly comes down to her unreliability. Like, if you're not consistently able to land Qs or rotate Qs on a target, maybe you don't have follow-up CC, maybe enemy team's just really mobile, then this champion really loses a lot of value. There are specific matchups where Morgana is really good, where you can get like Black Shield, lots of Black Shield value, and then utilize your ultimate effectively. She's very potent in most states, but more generalistically, just not a pick I'm a huge fan of. Her main problem obviously comes from her unreliability. LeBlanc sits as a good B2 option, like once again, kind of akin to like your Talons, your Akali's, and Talons and Akali's primarily. If you get the ball rolling, she's very oppressive. She has lots of inherent range compared to the other ones. Like she can play really far back and just harass with like Q and E rotations. So she does have a bit more of a fallback pattern, which obviously makes her a bit more oppressive and like competitive, which is why she tends to be a bit more traditionally viable in that environment. But once again, like the other picks, if you put the mastery in, she can be rewarding. She's just not something I'm really going to recommend for like a more average elo player. Vladimir sits as like a mid beta option. This pick can definitely have its moments where you get like an early a couple early kills, you get your Rabadons online really early, and you're just really utilizing that spike to output a huge amount of damage, and your burst is very powerful on Vladimir. But like a lot of the time these days, you're playing around your burst and getting like a rotation of like empowered Q, E, and like either utilizing that to get phase rush alongside an auto or W proc. And then, trading in lane with that, your damage is pretty good at the moment. And I think he's a solid mid-B tier option. Annie's, I would say, seen better days. Like, she, in her current state, is probably, like, one of the low, or, like, in more weaker spots she's been in for a while. I still think she definitely has her strength, like, having access to point-and-click CC, and a summon, which can be quite powerful if utilized correctly, is definitely a very clear strength of the champion, but her mana costs, her lack of wave clear oftentimes can feel quite underwhelming. Obviously, W is strong wave clear. It's just the mana cost of that ability just makes it really hard. And like if you're not opting into things like Ludens or your Malignance variations, then you're definitely gonna feel it. With Lost Chapter builds, it's not gonna be as much of a problem, but it is still there. Like Annie definitely struggles a bit more at the moment, but still sits as like a mid B2 option. If you're comfortable on the pick, then you're still definitely going to have like good moments on it. Victor sits as a mid B2 option. He will be reworked, I'm pretty sure, like very soon. Obviously, like that is looking to be what is going to happen. I'm pretty sure it's actually just confirmed at this point, though. The current Victor, obviously, I've spoken about it. If you're able to get like your stacks online, then he can definitely be quite powerful, and his trading is very potent. Like if you get like an early item and you're getting like your early E-evolve, the main problem comes from when you're not getting kills. Like he really takes a long time to come on, and that can feel quite punishing. Orianna still sits as like a high B2 option. This pick is obviously considered as one of the more traditional mages. That has good harass if you can space correctly and utilize your empowered autos. She's a very potent pick, and oftentimes a very good meta staple for that. In her current state, I would say she's on the weaker side for like the average player. I think in Elite she's still like a solid option, and you're still going to play her if that's like what you've kind of come to play in the current meta. With Syndra being nerfed as well, I wouldn't be surprised if Orianna Pro does rise slightly in those environments, but in a more mid to low elo environment, she's just slightly underperforming in her current state. Fizz moves up from the C tier to the B tier. The buffs this patch were nice enough to just move him up. He's obviously the most known matchup is going to be your ASOL matchups, and like the mobile mages are what he really thrives into, like your Oriannas, your Syndras. Fizz is really dominant in those situations, but he doesn't really have enough kind of variety of play patterns in his current state, and it's just not really strong enough to really push into the A tier. But like a lot of the other B tier assassins, if you get the ball rolling, he can feel really oppressive as like an option, and has good potential as a pick. Moving on to the A tier then, Echo is going to lead us off alongside Diana. I like just having both these picks next to each other. I like very like above average AP assassins, which are like pretty solid options, especially if you're very comfortable in them. Diana, very early game skewed. Echo, reliant on obviously bursting people down, whether it's like utilizing your Halo Blades or Electrocute. It can vary depending on what you need within the game. But both these picks definitely have clear strengths, and if you play around them or you're comfortable with them, then they can definitely have a lot of value within the current solo queue climate. Silas is actually going to drop all the way down to the B tier. This pick was within my S tier, but the nerfs to him this patch were quite aggressive. Like, he lost a decent amount of HP, like progressive as you go, progressing more as you go through the game. So by like he's definitely been pushed more towards being stronger early now, which I believe is going to be a problem long term. I think there is a high chance Silas maintains his position in competitive as a very strong pick. Unless like things heavily shift going into next season. Obviously, we're not in a competitive split at the moment, so it doesn't really matter a huge amount. But Silas, yeah, drops from the S tier down to the B tier. He's definitely a considerably bit weaker now, and is just going to be less durable, which hurts his burst builds. The main thing to be like aware of is like the less HP you build, the more you value having it in base stats, and obviously he lost it in base stats, so the squishier builds are going to be punished more by it. He's definitely going to be leaning more towards like your cosmic and your like proto build variants now. Other picks within the A tier then, we have Kale, who since it's like a low A tier pick, I've added her back as a solid option. Obviously she got buffed this patch, which has kind of like promoted people back to playing her. She's always preferred mid lane over top lane, and they had to nerf her in the mid lane in the past. Obviously Nemesis like popularized it briefly. They nerfed her magic resist, as that was, I mean, obviously mid lane tends to be more traditionally AP champion, so that is going to hurt her considerably more here. But she does prefer the shorter lane. It just gives her more safety, kind of akin to Nasus in a way, where these champions are actually better in the mid lane in their current states because of the the way the lane functions and how you can just play a bit safer. Obviously the bushes being pushed back can be played to, like, you can definitely play to it, and it can be a strength, but you can obviously also die if you like overextend and you're not warding effectively, so that is still something you have to be cognitive of. What side you're playing on, are you jungle tracking, and that will maintain its like being pretty important if you are playing these like scaling picks and you're playing these champions which don't have great escape tools. Redia stays within the A tier. She just moves up from being like a low A tier to like a high A tier option. The buffs to her passive were nice this patch. She's not being nerfed in 14.23. So if you're comfortable playing Aurelia, she's probably in the best spot she's been in for a while. Obviously, she she lost some power through Bork being nerfed, but then gained it back in the same patch with her being directly buffed. And yeah, the passive changes to like maintain stacks on towers, and then obviously translating some of her damage into like sieging on towers. It's very valuable. It enables her to kind of have a fallback pattern where she can siege more effectively, play on sides with more pressure, and yeah, that's definitely quite powerful for a champion like Aurelia, who is already very strong when she's able to utilize the minion wave to effectively 1v2 or just 1v1 people. Vel'Koz moves up to the high end of the A tier as well. He got buffed this patch, and the buffs were nice. They buffed his E cooldown, and they buffed his R early cooldown, and it just makes him able, if anything, the R cooldown is the main thing here. It enables him to just more consistently just burn ult for trading, rather than utilizing it as an execute tool. Obviously, preferably, you're going to want to kill people with the ability. You want to utilize it to finish someone off with the amount of range it has, but you can use it to chunk people and like gain lane prio, move to objectives. So I do think this pick definitely is in a considerably better spot. He still obviously has the same problems he's had for like the entire duration of the game, where he is an immobile mage, and that can definitely be quite punishing, especially into some of the assassins which Riot are really trying to promote in the current meta. Garen, Malphite, Garen, Malphite, and Renekton, I'm actually just going to put all three of these champions next to each other, and Nasus, we'll just group a lot of the top laner picks, or like top lane to mid lane picks. All these champions have been strong in the mid lane for a while. In Renekton's case, he's a great answer to Yasuo and Yone. Pick I'm always going to recommend. Same goes for Pantheon. Like, both these picks, great into Yasuo and Yone. They are going to be the primary things you pick these two champions for in the mid lane. Malphite's case, he's great into a lot of the AD pool. If a blind AD top mid laner comes out, or top matchup's bad, then you can flex him into mid, and he can have a lot of value. Obviously, into some of the AP matchups where you're just not going to really get any value out of building armor, you can go AP Malphite, like your Malignants, your like some of the AP orientated options with like Storm Surges and stuff. can be played, and he can definitely function on them. Nasus's case, he's a great champion against picks which just don't have the tools to really like play against his W. Like, if you can wither a target and just run them down, that is a very effective tool. He can also function into your Yasuo and Yones as a very strong pick. In Garen's case, his strength is he just can't really die ever in mid lane. If you're opting into like a phase rush with the tenacity on W, it just gives him such a strong safety net, and people could never really harass him down like frequently enough because of things like second wind, his passive, D shield, which just gives him great tools within the mid lane. Anyway, that is the top lane section over. Gragas, actually, I mean, Gragas and Cho'Gath, I should have just added on as well. In Gragas' case, he is a great, why is the word never able to come to my mind when I want to use it? But he's great for, the word is just not there. His burst is still really strong. Obviously, when you're in the mid lane, he mainly comes in as like a counter pick to things which are very reliant on diving into you, or he can like just mitigate specific matchups. My brain is just completely gone for some reason. In Cho'Gath's case, he is someone who can opt into both AP and tank builds. I actually played Roa with Protobelt variant today, which can function. Obviously gives him a bit more damage, so he can more consistently clear waves with his Q. And then you can play into like a tank orientated build, or you can just play raw tank from the get-go, where you're playing things like Heartsteel, Warmogs, your Unending Despairs, your Canic Rookins. All these items can function quite nicely on him. There are different rune choices, like you have your Halo Blades, your Arcane Comet, your Grasps, like a more traditional option to like some of the melee matchups. I think Cho'Gath mid's just in a pretty solid spot. Obviously, Cho'Gath still has the same issues he has, where his abilities are very telegraphed. He's a slow-moving tank with no dashes, and that in today's like game can feel quite punishing if you ever really fall behind, or people are like relying on you to carry the game. Hui sits as like a mid A tier option. Like this pick obviously he has his strengths in like being able to just rotate a load of different options and like have more tools in different scenarios. But like if you like just take him down to what he is in a mobile mage, and that can definitely feel quite punishing against like certain dive options. But in mid and low elo, you're not going to get punished as frequently. But then he's obviously got the skill curve of just having so many abilities to rotate, which can be very overwhelming for people. So if you're not comfortable on Hui, he's not as necessary as he was pre-nerf. Like Hui pre-nerf was a really good option. I think people should have like had him within their arsenal. After nerf, I think he's just a good A tier option, and if you're comfortable on him, then yeah, you should definitely play him. If you're not, he's not necessary in the current game. He's just a strong option there for you. Brand and Asol are your traditional low elo mages. These picks obviously scale well. I mean, they have very good dot capability. Asol scales absurdly well. Like Asol is probably the best scaling option in the game because of the way his scaling is presented in like an execute, percentage health damage, like increasing size on abilities. Stories like very much equate to like being a very good scaling pick. In Brand's case, he has been tagged down quite a bit, but he's still a very good mid to low elo option. Same goes for Malzahar. Like I think Malzahar is actually pretty close to the S tier, like probably closer than the other two, as like very good mid to low elo picks. These three picks aren't going to scale anywhere near as well going into the higher ranks. Like you're going to be considerably you're going to be more consistently punished, and that can definitely like hurt these picks. But I think all three of them are great mid and low elo champions, and they're three of the picks I would really recommend from the A tier if you're like a beginner mid laner player. Lissandra still maintains the spot within the A tier. She is great as a counter pick into like matchups where you really value the shutdown tools that she has access to through the W, the ultimate, and just being a very good anti-carry champion just gives her a lot of strength. Syndra drops towards the lower end of the A tier. The nerfs to her this patch definitely did hurt her. They went after the wrong ability in my opinion. They should have gone after the ultimate. I know some people have like been speaking about that as that is probably, I mean, it is the least skilled part about Syndra, but they took power off of her W, which is unfortunate, but she is a bit weaker now, so she does drop down to the low end of the A tier. Talia looks to be doing a bit better at the moment. She actually sits as like a high A tier option. I'm actually going to move some of these over the top laner pool. Talia also sits as a pretty close to S tier option, being a great champion into short range picks, which very much rely on diving her is something she really thrives into. Being able to more consistently rotate rotate her Q out, and then utilizing the E and the W to effectively like peel for herself. It just gives her a lot of strength. She tends to traditionally be more weak into like very modern like classic mages, like your Syndras, your Orianas, or into heavy artillery, the likes of Zareth, very good traditional pick into Talia. But she's definitely doing a bit better at the moment. Very solid A tier pick. Vex is a great counter pick. Like, she is the AP option into Yasuo and Yone or high mobility, where she can continuously rotate out her passive. You want to play her into squishy compositions where you can utilize the burst potential of some of her builds. But I've spoken to Vigavi too, and he still believes that CDR Vex is still a very viable option for her at the moment. And it's definitely something you can opt into if, like, you value being able to rotate more spells and more CC within combat. But more traditionally, you're going to play the burst build with, like, your Ludens, your Shadow Flames, or your Ludens, your Storm Surge. Stuff like that can all still function very nicely on her. I'm ending up, the only thing which really prohibits this guy from being in my S tier is just how unpopular he is. I believe if he was more popular, it'd actually be more harmful for the champion, though, because more people just understand how to play against him. But because of how niche he is, people don't understand how to play against his wave clear. They don't understand where a lot of his damage comes from and how the like turrets work, where if you're like autoing people, like the turrets will like do the enhanced blast against people. Like, most people just don't understand how Heimerdinger's kit works and like where his strengths lie, and that gives him a lot of strength. I believe this pick is a very close to S tier option, but it's primarily just played by one tricks, and that becomes quite hard to really value a pick like that, because like the data is just going to be relatively skewed. Ryze, I still love as an option. I think Ryze is a great A tier pick at the moment. He, akin to the likes of Talia, is great at shutting down like some of your short range matchups. Being able to utilize the global effectively can be really valuable as well, like moving on to side lanes. And his wave clear, he's just what I'd consider a very good mage to like a middle mage. Like the likes of Brand, Asol, Malzahar are great beginner mages. I'd say Ryze is a great champion, like if you want to learn a mage towards the higher ranks. Same goes for the likes of Hui. Like, if you're very comfortable with the role and you really enjoy some of the options, then Ryze is a great pick there for you. Akshan is probably overpowered at the moment. The static Shiv build looks to be incredibly strong. I believe Phantasm is really trying to popularize it at the moment, and it is quite rapidly increasing. I think with Collector being nerfed in 14.23, people will realize and just move over static Shiv, and Akshan will be nerfed in 14.24. You can mark me on that. I believe that is what is going to happen. If you play Collector Akshan, he drops down to like the BC tier. If you play static Akshan, I believe he's probably an S tier pick in his current state, just for like a general play, like all elos. It is very strong on him, and it just gives him a lot of power in its current state. So be aware of that. Akshan, great pick at the moment. If you're looking for like an AD option to play in the mid lane, he is probably the best one there for you. I will actually speak briefly on Ambessa. This pick, I'm not going to rate within the mid lane at the moment, but there are lots of things shifting around on her at the moment. We've seen like Electrocute Cyclosword builds. We've seen some like Shield Bash iterations. This pick looks to be really strong within the mid lane and jungle. Honestly, there's a chance that top lane Ambessa is actually her third weakest role out of the three. It could be crazy to think about. But yeah, there's loads of things shifting around on this champion. I'd recommend really like doing your research and learning the pick before taking it into ranked. Honestly, wouldn't take it into ranked on the first patch. I would recommend just putting time into it. And then once you feel comfortable and once you understand where the strengths are within the kit, your power, like where the breakpoints are, and then taking it into solo queue and like trying to have success on it. And like a lot of these times, you're not going to have success. Like, that is just the reality of the situation. Sometimes things just won't really work for you, and you might force just a play pattern which doesn't work for you. And that is going to be the case with this champion, as akin to every champion in the game. Some just won't really mesh with what you're good at. Identify what you're good at, like within the roster, and then yeah, utilize that and like play to your strengths. That is what I'd always recommend. Continuing on, the A tier, the likes of Nico, still a very solid option. Obviously tends to be more early game orientated, and then like utilizing her snowball to get powerful like ultimates off throughout the game, like multi-man ultimates to win team fights, and then snowball and push the game to a winning state. She's like a mid to low A tier option in her current state. What other options we got here? Xerath. I still love Xerath. Like, Xerath is my favorite artillery champion. I just think the way the kit is just makes him a very good approachable option. Like, if you enjoy Xerath and you're looking for like a good if you enjoy playing artillery mages, then Xerath is the pick I would always recommend going to. And he's in a really good spot at the moment. Like, there are two different builds. Obviously, if you like your Blackfire iterations, which seems to be pretty strong across loads of the champions within the roster at the moment. So that is something to really be aware of. But you have like some of your burst-orientated options, like your Ludens, your Storm Surge, your Shadow Flames. There's just loads of different things you can like opt into as champion, and he is very successful in his current state. And then the final pick within the A tier is Neferi. She is very good in low elo, really aggressively falls off in high. Obviously a stat checky assassin. She is one of the easiest assassins to play in the game, mostly because almost all the assassins are going to be harder to pilot than her in her because she is very stat checky and one-dimensional in like her playstyle. The S tier options then. So moving up is Swain. He goes from the C tier to the S tier. They massively buffed him this patch, and he is still having the same issues that he had pre-rework, which is unfortunate, but I think it was just a complete mess up of a rework. It just didn't address the problems of the champion, and I think Riot might look back or like might look to do some future work on Swain. I think the ultimate is like really awkward to kind of play around now with like the recast functionality on it. I mean, oftentimes if you're considering getting recasts, then this champion's broken in most scenarios, which is maybe what they aim for. Maybe they aim for this champion to be very strong in specific situations, which then, once again, it would be the same issues as the previous iteration of Swain. So it's kind of like awkward what they're doing with him. But the main kind of things to look for at the moment are Blackfire Torch looks to be considerably more performant than his other options. It no longer looks to be like Rylai Rush or Liandry Rush or like some of the other Rush options which he used to have. Cosmic Drive looks to be a really good second item on him, so I recommend looking into that, like a Blackfire and a Cosmic iteration. And then you still have access to some of the same items, like your Liandry's and Rylai's pop back up as options. Riftmaker is always going to be like a capstone item on him when you have built up a lot of HP. And overall, the champion is in a stronger spot now. He is a very good S tier option, probably overpowered if you're playing him into a consistent amount of melee who don't really have the burst to ever take him down. That is where he's obviously going to thrive. Cassiopeia is also going to move up to the S tier. His pick has just been strong for a while, and I just feel like it's been like right to move her up alongside Ari, who is also going to go from the A to S tier. What's interesting, which I've always really found quite funny about like people who look at data and just like data itself, is when you nerf something like Silas, who was the most popular mid laner in the game, like the knock-on effects of it, like what champions become considerably stronger, what champions were really benefiting from the Silas matchup, and now that he's weaker are like going to be winning it more consistently. And that's always just something interesting to look about, and how some of the like the smallest changes in the game, or in this case obviously it's a large change, really has like a knock-on effect with like other champions and like some of the matchup tables. And it's just like even popularity within competitive can be a really big decider on like how meta shifts happen within the solo queue. But yeah, Ari, a great mage at the moment, has really good mobility, has the like the potency of her burst potential, doesn't have like the DPS that some of the other mages have access to. Like, she is more reliant on her like hit and run playstyle, but she's still a very good option. Cassiopeia obviously better into like shorter range options. Very like a very potent DPS mage, and if you're ever ahead, then she is one of the best options you can have on your team, but also still very reliant on like melee and short range compositions where she can really utilize the effectiveness of her kiting power. The other S tier options are Anivia, who drops from the S plus to the S tier. She's still a great option. Obviously, very much is very potent in her wave clear, her ability to manipulate fights, her control over situations with her ultimate and her W, and then her burst with like electrocute and then like QE rotations. It's all very still prevalent. it's just going to be weaker than it was in the previous patch because of the slight nerf to her E. Lux, still a great burst mage within the mid lane. She has obviously artillery light. Well, she's like a hybrid burst artillery option. And she's been really good for a while. Her wave clear is really solid. Like, oftentimes you can just ER the wave and then roam onto sides if as like a fallback pattern. But you can effectively trade back in lane in a lot of these situations. Utilizing the passive and spacing can make her a very potent pick. And I believe she is one of the best mages within the game you can play at the moment. Like, a very good S tier option. Veigar's very strong in middle low elo, which is what this is targeted towards, so he does very much like sit as an S tier option in my opinion. The main problem with Veigar is though, like compared to the other 5 champions here, he does not scale anywhere near as well into high elo. You are more consistently going to get punished. The game run times are usually shorter, and the way the maps often play out are just going to not be as beneficial as they would be in low and mid, where you are more consistently just able to hit your skill shots and then scale effectively into the late game. Sits as like a high S tier option mode, but does fall down quite aggressively in the lower tiers, in the higher tiers rather. And then Galio is still an S tier pick. I really like Galio as an anti-mage option. Obviously, he isn't really blindable, which is the one thing kind of like prohibiting him from being like an S plus option. But if enemy team locks in a mage or has AP mid, AP jungle, he is the best. Well, I mean, he's going to be one of the best, if not just outright the best option there for you. And that just gives him so much power within the mid lane. I think everyone should have Galio as like an option within their arsenal. He's a relatively simple to play pick. Like, you don't need a huge amount of mastery to effectively operate this champion. And I think that is, just like beneficial to just have this kind of a pick within your arsenal. My recommended go-tos this patch are things like Ari. I still think Lux is very valuable as like a more she's still very popular, but still like a more niche and less traditional like option. Like, the others are more traditionally mid laners. Lux tends to be more traditionally a support, but she's still very good within the mid lane. And Nivea tends to be played primarily by one tricks a bit more, but is still very good in the like as like a general pick. And then Swain obviously got mega buff this patch and has just been performing quite well. Ari's my recommended all-rounder option. If you want something good for low elo, I think Malzahar, Asol, Brand are still very good options there for you. And I think, like a lot of the A and the S tier, if you're comfortable on them, they can be really valuable. And even like your B and Cs, like if you're one tricks, if you're a one trick and you know the matchup tables and you know where you can really exploit most matchups, then all these picks will work in mid and low elo. Like, you're not going to have huge amounts of resistance to these champions, but the higher up you go, like a lot of them will translate worse, and a lot of them require considerably more mastery, which is why, the lower mastery ones would traditionally be higher up on the tier list. Well, those are my thoughts for 14.22. Let me know what you think in the comment section, and I will see you in the next one. Goodbye.